Have you ever wondered what the world would be like if a key moment in history just vanished? Picture this: a world without the Mona Lisa, without Michelangelo's David, without the genius of Leonardo da Vinci, a world where the explosion of art, science, and thought we call the Renaissance simply never happened. It's a mind-bending idea, right? This isn't just about losing a few pretty paintings. The Renaissance was a complete rebirth of Western civilization. It reshaped everything, from how we see ourselves to how we govern our nations and explore the universe. So, what would our timeline look like if Europe had stayed in the Middle Ages? How would you, me, and everyone we know be different? Stick around, because we're about to dive into a fascinating alternate history. We'll explore a world where the spark of the Renaissance was never lit, and see just how dark, or perhaps surprisingly different, that world might be. Let's start with the political landscape. Without the Renaissance, the very idea of the modern nation-state might not exist. The Renaissance saw the rise of powerful, centralized monarchies in places like France, Spain, and England. These rulers, funded by a growing merchant class, broke away from the universal authority of the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire. So, in our alternate timeline, imagine a Europe that remains a fractured collection of feudal territories and city-states, all vying for power under the overarching, and likely much stronger, influence of the Church. The political map would look completely different. Perhaps the Holy Roman Empire wouldn't just be a name, but a real, dominant force controlling Central Europe for centuries longer. The concept of diplomacy as we know it, with embassies and international relations, was born in Renaissance Italy. Without it, conflicts might be more frequent and resolved more often through brute force than through negotiation. The balance of power would be unrecognizable. Would Spain and Portugal still have launched the Age of Discovery? Maybe, but their motivations might have been purely religious, a crusade against the unknown, rather than a mix of God, glory, and gold. This could mean that the Americas, if discovered at all, would have been colonized under a completely different set of principles, possibly leading to an even more brutal and less economically driven form of conquest. The rise of political philosophy, thinkers like Machiavelli, who separated politics from morality, wouldn't have occurred. Rulers would continue to justify their power solely through divine right, making challenges to their authority not just treason, but heresy. This lack of political innovation would create a stagnant system, resistant to change and potentially far more oppressive, where the will of the king and the church is absolute and unquestionable for centuries longer than in our timeline. Global power dynamics would be completely skewed. Without strong, unified European nations, perhaps the Ottoman Empire would have continued its expansion unchecked, pushing deeper into Europe. Or maybe powers in Asia, like Ming China, would have faced a far less ambitious and fragmented Europe, allowing them to become the dominant global forces. The world's political stage would be set with entirely different actors, playing by a completely different set of rules. Now, let's think about science and technology. This is where things get really bleak. The Renaissance was fueled by a rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman knowledge, which sparked a new wave of scientific inquiry. Thinkers started to believe in observing the world for themselves, rather than just accepting ancient texts and religious dogma. Without this shift, the scientific revolution of the 17th century, which gave us Newton, and the laws of physics, would likely be delayed by centuries, if it happened at all. Copernicus, who dared to suggest the Earth revolved around the sun, was a product of the Renaissance spirit. In a world without it, humanity might have continued to believe it was the center of the universe for much longer. The Church's authority over scientific matters would remain absolute. Thinkers who questioned the established order wouldn't be celebrated. They'd be branded heretics. This climate of fear would stifle innovation. The printing press, a crucial invention from the cusp of the Renaissance, might still have been invented, but its use would be dramatically different. Instead of spreading new ideas, philosophies, and scientific theories, it would likely be controlled by the church and state, used exclusively to print Bibles and official decrees. The free exchange of knowledge that fueled scientific progress would be impossible. What about technology? The artistic demands of the Renaissance drove incredible engineering feats. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, for example, required new machines and mathematical techniques. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks are filled with designs for flying machines, weapons, and anatomical studies that were centuries ahead of their time. Without this synergy between art and engineering, technological progress would crawl at a snail's pace. Medical science would be hit particularly hard. The Renaissance renewed interest in human anatomy, leading to groundbreaking discoveries that paved the way for modern medicine. Without Vesalius and his detailed anatomical charts, medicine would remain a grim mix of superstition, guesswork, and remedies based on the four humors. Life expectancy would likely remain tragically low, and society would be periodically ravaged by diseases we learned to control thanks to the scientific mindset born in this era. Essentially, without the Renaissance, the world would remain trapped in a pre-scientific mindset where the natural world is a place of mystery and divine will, not a system to be understood, questioned, and mastered. What would it feel like to live in this world? For the average person, life would be vastly different and likely much harder. The Renaissance ushered in the idea of humanism, the belief in the potential and worth of the individual. This was a radical concept. Before this, your identity was defined by your social class, your guild, or your place in the feudal hierarchy. The idea that a common person could achieve greatness through their own talents was revolutionary. Without humanism, the rigid social structures of the Middle Ages would persist. Social mobility would be virtually non-existent. If you were born a peasant, you would die a peasant, and so would your children. The concept of individual rights and freedoms, the very bedrock of modern democracies, would be an alien idea. Your life would be dictated by your lord and your priest. Culturally, the world would be a much duller place. The explosion of art, music, and literature would be absent. Imagine a world with no Shakespeare, no Cervantes, no Da Vinci. The artistic style would remain rooted in the flat, two-dimensional, and purely religious art of the medieval period. Art would serve only to glorify God and the Church, not to explore the human experience. Literacy rates would remain abysmally low. Education would be a privilege reserved for the clergy and the highest nobility. For everyone else, the world would be understood through sermons and oral traditions, not through personal reading and critical thought. This lack of education would also have a profound impact on social change. Uprisings and reforms are often fueled by new ideas spreading among the populace. Without widespread literacy and the printing press to disseminate these ideas, the population would be far more docile and easier to control. The Protestant Reformation, which was a direct challenge to the Church's authority and was supercharged by the printing press, would almost certainly not have happened. Europe would remain under a single, unified Catholic doctrine. This would mean no religious wars that tore Europe apart, but also no rise of the Protestant work ethic, which some historians link to the rise of capitalism. The world would be more unified in faith, but also more culturally and intellectually uniform, lacking the vibrant diversity of thought that has driven so much of our progress. So, what are the long-term, global consequences of this alternate history? The ripple effects are enormous. A technologically and politically stagnant Europe would never have achieved the global dominance it did from the 16th century onwards. The age of imperialism might never have happened, or it would have been led by other powers. Perhaps the Ottoman Empire, or a unified China under an outward-looking dynasty, would have become the world's leading superpower. This would mean that the languages, laws, and cultural norms that dominate our world today would be completely different. Instead of English being the global lingua franca, it might be Turkish or Mandarin. The political ideologies that shaped the 20th century democracy, communism, fascism are all descendants of Renaissance and Enlightenment thinking. Without this foundation, global politics would have evolved along an entirely different path. The very concept of the West as a cultural and political entity might not exist. The scientific and industrial revolutions, which were born in Europe, would be delayed or might have emerged elsewhere. Imagine an industrial revolution beginning in China. With a completely different set of social and environmental consequences, the world would be unrecognizable. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, liberty, and the scientific method, was a direct intellectual heir to the Renaissance. Without the former, the latter is inconceivable. This means no American or French revolutions, no constitutions or bills of rights. The very ideas we hold as self-evident that all people are created equal and have certain inalienable rights would have had no intellectual soil in which to grow. Our modern world is built, layer by layer, on the foundations laid during the Renaissance. Removing that single layer causes the entire structure to collapse, leaving a world that is not just different in its details, but fundamentally alien to our own experience. It's a world that is more feudal, more dogmatic, and less focused on the power and potential of the individual. So, we've journeyed through a world without a Renaissance. It's a timeline where Europe remains locked in a medieval mindset, where scientific progress is stifled by dogma, and where the individual is secondary to the institution. The political map is fractured, the cultural landscape is barren, and the technological leaps that defined our modern era are centuries away. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It shows just how fragile progress can be, and how a single period of intellectual and artistic flourishing could pivot the entire course of human history. Of course, this is all speculation. History is a complex web, and pulling on one thread might have led to unforeseen outcomes we can't even imagine. Perhaps another culture would have had its own Renaissance. Perhaps progress would have found another way, slower and more painful, but inevitable. What do you think? Is a world without the Renaissance destined to be a darker age, or could humanity have found another path to the modern world? This thought experiment really highlights how much we owe to those artists, scientists, and thinkers from centuries ago. Their courage to question, to create, and to rediscover the past literally built the world we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into an alternate past. I hope it gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations of history and what-if scenarios. And I really want to hear from you. What do you think would be the biggest change in a world without the Renaissance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.